Numerous reports indicate that manufacturing has emerged as the favorite target of ransomware groups and hackers. In response, a new report from Industrial Media discusses the evolution of industrial cybersecurity, its current state, and the tactics hackers are using, including phishing schemes, malware, and ransomware attacks. It also details solutions in arming manufacturers with the knowledge and resources needed to win more fights on this highly complex and ultra-competitive battlefield. Download the industrial sector's new battlefield by going to manufacturing.net/cyber. Hi, I'm Jeff Rankin, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. As the industrial attack surface continues to expand and the hackers get smarter and more complex in the nature of their operations, the best weapon for defending your enterprise continues to be knowledge, or in cybersecurity speak, threat intelligence. This means understanding the impact of artificial intelligence and how the bad guys are using large language models like ChatGPT to launch phishing and credential harvesting campaigns. It means even though you think you know everything about ransomware attacks, and even though the industrial sector continues to be the leading target for these attacks, you need to stay on top of the shifting tactics being used by groups like Lockbit and Black Basta, and how the roles of organizations like initial access brokers are providing new opportunities for black hat organizations. It also means understanding how the complex entanglements of modern supply chains have produced more cybersecurity soft spots. In case you need to sell this up the food chain, a recent report from TrustWave shows that the average data breach is now costing manufacturers $4.7 million, which is about $300,000 more than any other industry. This led Cybersixgill to predict that in 2024, more companies will adopt threat exposure management, a holistic, proactive approach to cybersecurity where cyber threat intelligence is a foundational component. To discuss these concepts, we welcome Gabi Reish, Global Head of Product Development at Cybersixgill, a leading provider of cyber threat intelligence solutions, to the show. So Gabi, thanks so much for joining us today. I know a big part of what we're talking about in industrial cybersecurity, and that Cybersixgill in particular gets into a lot, is when we talk about threat intelligence. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit in terms of why is this such a key priority for you guys right now? Why should this be getting a little bit more interest or investment from the industrial cybersecurity community?
I'll first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's a great pleasure for me. There are a couple of things that are evolving over the years, and every year when we talk about what's happening in next year, we always talk about cybersecurity. We talk about the cyber war raging on and more sophistication and technology. Nothing is new, but when you think of it, every year, this war and the balance between the criminals and the cybercrime and the protector is intensifying. Sophistication, technology. Last year was a year of generative AI as a new weapon on both sides, on the bad side, and also how to utilize it also for the good. And this sophistication, to a large extent, in the different areas, is actually demanding that you plan ahead with all the defenses that you have. And this is what we at Cybersixgill are all about. It's about threat intelligence. And intelligence is to provide you with insights and knowledge so that you can prepare yourself, you can be ready, you can understand what are the actors, who are the actors, what are their motives, how are they planning to attack you, so that you can put your relevant assets, your security assets in the right places to protect yourself. And the problem is that because the threat vectors are so wide these days, if you don't use some proactive measures, then you're going to be very thin, regardless of how much you're investing. So I think this is a very, very important aspect, and that's why we are focusing on that. Another very interesting thing that we're seeing, and it's nothing new, but it's intensifying, is the regulatory requirements that are coming up. And regulatory requirements are basically requiring organizations, different types of organizations, to be as proactive, to be ready, to understand the exposure and the risk, and also to disclose when something bad happens. And this disclosure, for example, the two new disclosure rules of SEC as a regulatory requirement from any public company traded in in the US, is requiring people or organizations to take proactive controls of their security measures and to disclose when something bad happens, and that requires good intelligence, good programs in order to defend themselves. So this is with the domain that we're in, and this is why, to me, it's very, very exciting, this space, and how we can help organizations and different types of organizations be as proactive as possible.
Yeah, I definitely want to circle back on the SEC regulations and how that's impacting a lot of things within the industrial sector. But first I want to dive into a little bit more of the threat intelligence, because it seems to me there's really two different portions of this. There are the organizations that you want to understand and know about, and then it's the tactics that they're using. So when you go about this whole process, or you're working with customers, where do you start? Do you start by learning about Lockbit, or do you start learning about their tactics that they're using?
Yeah. You know, in both cases, it really depends on the organization that you're in. I think that the holy grail of any organization is to understand, and that's the holy grail is the ability to answer a very simple question. Am I exposed, and by whom? Okay, and how? That's what they really want to know. Okay, they want to know from how should I protect myself? And this is a very, very challenging question. It's like predicting the weather, without any forecasting tools. But that's very important. And this predictive capability is critical. And as a result of that, it really depends on the maturity of the company to understand, just to understand or read about Lockbit is good. But, you really want to understand, what does Lockbit mean to me? Or, for example, there was this massive attack, Log4j. How does Log4j relate to my organization? So that's why what we're trying to do is not only provide a lot of threat context, a lot of threat intelligence, but we want to attach it to your specific organization context, meaning understanding the nature of your organization, and based on that to combine understanding of what we call the attack surface, your specific attack surface, to understand that there could be two banks sitting next to each other, but each of them has different types of exposure because they're running different software, different elements there. So attach the threat context, intelligence to this context, to how does the organization look from the outside, from the attackers, and that's what I think is critical. So it's not necessarily about understanding the methods and techniques and tactics of any other. I think it's mostly understanding, how am I, as an organization, how am I exposed? Where am I exposed? And based on that, where and what are the threat actors talking about my specific exposures? Am I vulnerable? Are they talking about exploitation of these specific exposures or not?
So, Gabi, I think those are great points, because they really reinforce some of the blocking and tackling that we talk about with industrial cybersecurity. The first being, in order to really understand what you need to do, it's doing all those basic things, getting an inventory of your attack surface, understanding all your connection points and things like that, and then also sort of fighting some of those common approaches where we want to cut and paste stuff from the IT side over to the OT side, and it doesn't always work. So it's really understanding all of these different assets and then taking that threat intelligence and putting it in context of what you know about your organization. So it's nothing that's independent of each other. It all has to work together. It seems to make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'll give you, one example there. You could have a great mapping of your OT environment, and you identify the IP address of your printer and your HVAC system, okay, as an example, or a specific PLC. But it doesn't really mean, okay, and then you'll map them and you'll say, okay, there are specific vulnerabilities in your printer, okay? So there's a lot of, cool stuff that, researchers talking about how can you exploit your printer. But guess what? It's not necessarily the situation where threat actors around the globe or APT groups are actually trying to attack your printer. So the thing is that you need to balance, and this is what threat intelligence does. It takes these assets that you do, and it actually matches relevant threat context. So what we are doing, for example, in vulnerability exploit intelligence is not necessarily only saying that this specific HVAC system or your printer has a specific vulnerability that could be exploited, but what we will tell you is what's the exploitability probability of that specific based on what the actors are talking about. What do APT groups care about? Maybe they don't really care about the printer. So why am I spending so much efforts in patching and fixing and protecting these things when nobody really cares about it?
So, I mean, I do have to ask, though, when you look at it, because I read a lot of the reports that you guys put out, is there any specific, whether it's a threat actor, a certain type of tactic, a certain sort of vulnerability or soft spot that's being exploited right now that is maybe getting more of your attention that you see as more prominent or deserving a little more attention?
I'm not necessarily sure I'm giving the right answer here. I think that what we're seeing is increasing. It's a consistent increase in the use of ransomware. It is continuously growing. And this is, more and more groups becoming more and more sophisticated. And the change over time, when we thought of ransomware 5 years ago, we thought of WannaCry, where somebody would lock your files and then they would request that you actually pay them ransom. And that's why we called it ransomware. That was that. But ransomware is not that anymore. Basically, what they do is they upload all of your data system somewhere else. And then the big ransomware is not locking files on your file system anymore. But it's actually, when you look at what CLOP are doing and other threat actors, it's actually downloading significant amounts of data. And that's what they're doing. So they are sophisticating technology-wise on their side. We're also seeing a lot of malicious use of technologies like generative AI to do social engineering and phishing and some of that. So this is something which is increasing there. Specific groups, there's always back and forth. New groups are coming and new comings. But again, I think the sophistication in ransomware, sophistication in technology is being utilized by the bad guys is something that we are seeing increasingly.
Absolutely. And those double extortion campaigns they're on one hand intriguing to watch, but also terrifying if you're on the other end of that and having to experience that. And the industrial sector continues to be such a huge target for those ransomware campaigns. So looking a little bit, I want to circle back actually to something else you mentioned earlier in those SEC regulations that have come down. How are you seeing that impacting industrial cybersecurity? Is this coming to the forefront in terms of because companies have to be more, provide more visibility and be more transparent about these attacks? Does that leading to greater levels of investment and a focus internally on cybersecurity? Or is they're trying to figure out new ways to just share as little as possible?
So I think these are all good steps in the right direction. I think that this disclosure is very, very important. And these new SEC rules are basically aimed to enhance the protection of sensitive information at the end of the day and improve the overall cybersecurity posture of organizations. That's the generative requirement there. And, it requires insights into governance, but it requires also incident response and reporting. And I think that these are two things. It also requires and this is something which is challenging, but we know how important it is. It's also third-party risk management, understanding who is your suppliers. And I think in the industrial space, when you think of supply chain and who are you working, it's not only the digital supply chain, it's also the physical supply chain. It's critical. Who are your suppliers? How are they working? What are the vulnerabilities of your suppliers? Are your suppliers under specific breaches or ransomware attacks and so on? And what the implications it has on you? So all these rules or these disclosure rules, I think, will improve a lot organizations' ability and cybersecurity posture. And then again, from my space as threat intelligence, these new SEC rules, I think, have a direct impact on these programs because threat intelligence plays a crucial role in identifying and mitigating these threats and being less proactive. So really to understand where you are, what are the assets that you should care about, and what are the programs that you do in order to be preemptive and proactive to what you do. And as we said before, you don't need to protect everything in the same way. It's all about prioritization. And I think that's what you need to prioritize. Where you want to put more protection versus less. You want to protect the different systems in your environment versus others, and it's related to the IT environment and also to the OT environment.
No, great points, Gabby, especially when we talk about the supply chain dynamic. And when it comes to understanding the attack surface, it's not just those things that are either physically or from a network perspective under your control. It's also understanding your partners, everybody else that's involved in your production cycle, in your supply chain. So that's interesting. And the other thing that comes into play here more and more is also just an appreciation, again, for what you have and understanding how to apply all these new technologies. One of which that you mentioned earlier is artificial intelligence and ChatGPT. What are you seeing there? We know that this is a tool that the bad guys really like to use for phishing campaigns and credential harvesting and things of that nature. What are you seeing both in terms from a threat intelligence perspective as well as how enterprises are responding to this threat?
Let's talk about threat actors are using technologies like generative AI to improve a lot of their methods and tactics that they're using. They're using it for better ways to do social engineering and phishing, because they can really, one of the great things about GPT in general, or open, whatever technology is used there, is the ability to humanize interaction and actually try to mimic human interaction. So I think that what we're seeing is that we're seeing specific GPTs that are actually helping do a lot of social. Also, threat actors are using it in order to develop the ultimate weapons, ultimate code, and they can use it now to develop code that I wouldn't say is non-breakable, but actually malicious code or malware, and they can actually produce malware to a lot faster and a lot more efficiently. Yeah. I'm on the good side, or like on the protective side, and I would like to say from that perspective, there are two things I want to say about generative AI. In 2023 was a year where everybody had to do something with generative AI, which is a good thing. But I also consider generative AI, 2023, as the year of the generative AI stampede. Basically, everybody was doing something, and everybody was stepping on each other, and regardless of what product you had to have a chat within your product.
Yeah.
And I think that 2024 will be the year where the dust will settle, and then we'll realize what sticks and what doesn't stick. And it's not only about chat, but it's really understanding which technologies generative AI can actually be a strong place or not. I'm in the threat intelligence space, where it's all about collecting millions of intelligent items and posts from different locations, from the dark web, from Telegram, from many different places, and discourse between threat actors. So for me, generative AI is the ultimate ideal tool to actually decipher and distill all this information into clear, simple summarization. So an example, I could have a post of about a very, very long post of ransomware about threat actors, and I can actually ask GPT in a flip second to actually go and decipher that and create me a simple summary of what's happening and create correlations. So for threat intelligence, generative AI is an ultimate tool to actually give me very, very simple instructions on what to do. The last thing I want to say about generative AI, there are three main challenges where I'm hearing from customers about generative AI. One is transparency. I want you to help me understand, where did generative AI come up with this answer? That's one thing. Second is privacy. I want to make sure that you're not exposing me and my assets, my OT assets, to the entire world. So when they're putting it in OPI model. So that's that's that. And so what we're doing is we are masking all the customer assets before they go into the model and out, so that we're fully private. And the last thing that we need to make sure is quality, and that's what we're hearing a lot, is to prevent what's called hallucinations of generative AI.
Yeah.
Generative AI is also very good at hallucinating and giving answers, even if they were not the right answers, but just trying to satisfy you. And that's one of the things that we are breaking. So we're making sure that our generative AI won't lie. Okay, we're trying to do that. So for good and for bad, like any technology is used both ways.
Are we going to become potentially too reliant on AI? We're taking all this, it's going to gather all this data for us and potentially spit back a solution. I can appreciate getting there this year and letting the dust settle a little bit, but maybe I'm thinking too hard about this one. Do we have to fend off against maybe being over reliant on what AI can do for us from a defensive perspective as well?
I, I think this is always a question, when you think of the past 20 years, every time there was a new revolution in IT, where it was, suddenly the old technologies that we're using suddenly don't exist or not relevant anymore. We need to see new levels of protection. When we came with mobile, then we suddenly realized that, hey, all of our technologies that were there to protect ourselves against mobile, against the network, the relevant network or the older network, but not relevant, we need to do something. And then we moved to cloud. And then suddenly we were too reliant on the cloud. What should we do? And what was funny was that we had organizations say, we're not going to do everything on the cloud, we're going to keep on premise. But then we developed technologies to adapt to the challenges in the cloud, the security challenges. And then we adopted that because we want to move forward. I think the generative AI, when you think of generative AI, and there's a lot of research and a lot of reports from so many different analysts worldwide, is basically taking over a lot of things, taking over a lot of work in different places. So it requires us to adapt also security defenses. I think the same thing with OT and IoT. I think that when you think of that, a lot of it's also some kind of an evolution or revolution, the fourth generation of industry generation, whatever. But I think that also we need to see how we are adapting our security technologies. I want to say that this morning, let's talk about, Elon Musk's Neuralink, the latest thing that we heard about today. So you're going to ask me, how are we going to protect and do some cybersecurity defenses against people hacking into my, into my chip in my brain? That's the next thing we're going to ask ourselves about.
Yeah, it's a constant battle. It is definitely always evolving something different, which is why the threat intelligence is so important in a defensive planning. So this has been great, Gabi. We've been talking a lot about some of the different stuff that's going on out there. Maybe you can bring it back home and tell us a little bit more about Cybersixgill and some of the stuff that you guys are doing to help with industrial cybersecurity.
Yeah. So one of the things that maybe I should talk about, and, is the biggest challenge, I think, with threat intelligence. One of the biggest challenges is what I call the CTI paradox. And the CTI paradox is that the more you have intelligence, the less you know. That's the very funny intelligence. And the reason is that, we see it more and more that customers are more and more concerned once you give them more data. And what we see in different reports, customers are making, okay, I am getting a lot of threat intelligence, but I'm going to make my own decisions because it's too much. I'm overwhelmed. There's noise. And this goes again to, you have all these different IoT assets and the question is, where should you really divest? Where should you invest and where should you invest your protections? Yeah. And this also goes in the world of IoT. I heard a CISO, a CFO and a CISO, a very large pharmaceutical company, a couple of years ago. And I had a meeting with both the CISO, the chief security officer, and the chief financial officer. And the chief security officer in this very large pharmaceutical company said, I'm very concerned about data security, data breaches, whatever. And the CFO said, yes, okay, so somebody will breach my data, not good. What more concerns me is somebody breaches into my production line and changes the dosage of one of my, medicines, whatever, and I now need to do a recall, which will damage my reputation for ages and the lawsuits and whatever. And this is what prioritization is all about, and also in the world of IoT, is to understand that we are vulnerable in many, many places, and there are many places that we could be exploited. Also, when you map the different assets in the industrial space. But the question is, where do you want to invest? Where do you want to put most of your resources? And you need to look at the threat context. What are threat actors talking about? What are the methods they're trying to use? The organization, what assets do you have? But also combine that with the business context. And I think that's the important part there. So I've got my production line for my medical, equipment, or my different medical medicine that I have, which may be more important than the data that I have stored in a customer list. So it's all about the context threat context, business context, and also the threat context combined together, which is very, very relevant also with the amount of assets and data that you have in OT environment also. So it's prioritizing them. And once you do that, then I think that this paradox is one of the things that you can actually settle with a paradox, because just to overwhelm our customers or users with so much data and have them figure that out becomes, is not the right way. To provide them with the relevant context for them to focus on the things that they should matter, that matter to them.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And we've seen this before. As you referenced, it's a great comparison with a lot of the IoT developments. Plant managers and those on the plant floor were getting so much information, they didn't know how to prioritize it. They weren't sure what to look at in establishing dashboards. So it's a great comparison there when we're looking at all of these different potential threats and different vulnerabilities on the OT side. So, Gabi, I want to pick your brain a little bit about a couple of different bigger picture issues as it relates to industrial cybersecurity. One of them, and you kind of touched on this before, is that human dynamic, the human element that's such a big part of, well, if a phishing attack is going to be successful, if a ransomware attack is, how far is it going to get? You went back to WannaCry, which was a worm, and we're still learning. We've had people talk about Stuxnet, which is even further back, and we're still learning about, it's so cyclical in nature with a lot of these problems. So from what you've seen in working with companies, how do you attack or how do you reinforce the human dynamic of cybersecurity in terms of educating and getting people to not just understand double-factor authentication, but to embrace it?
No, it's funny that you asked that, because I always say that the human being is the number one factor for cybersecurity of incidents. Okay, so let's eliminate all the human and we'll solve the problem. Okay, and that's maybe what generative AI will do to us.
Yeah, right.
But until we get there, I think that it's a challenge and it's a battle. There's a lot of security awareness training that I've seen has developed and evolved over the years. So there's a lot of more awareness related to what's the right thing to do and what's not the right thing to do, or to think twice. And regardless of that, I think that the human nature is a problem, because first of all, we trust somebody and then we think twice. We think, so yeah. We are very trustworthy sort of nature. That's who we are. So we trust, when we get an email that sounds very legit, and using generative AI, making it even more legit, most likely we'll click on something before we think twice. So that's on one hand, but I think that security awareness, and we see more and more organizations and companies that are looking at that. I think that security hygiene is important. And again, I think that things are a lot more acceptable than they used to be 5 or 10 years ago. So again, we can't completely remove the human being from the process. I don't think we could remove the trustworthiness of people. We trust human beings. We trust other people. And it's a good thing. But with that said, I think that on one hand, we need to have balances so that a good training. But also, I would like to say, on a highway, there are guardrails. And guardrails basically mean that if you make a mistake and there are guardrails that protect you from falling off the cliff. And that's what a guardrail is all about. So we need to build technologies that even if you made a mistake, then you have enough safety nets in place so that nothing dramatic will happen. And so I think it's part of the technology, the industry, my industry, to see how we can build enough guardrails on one hand, but also let things move forward with enough guardrails in place.
No, that's a great comparison. I like that a lot. And it's interesting. I think we have an opportunity in manufacturing, especially when it comes to cybersecurity, because we've got a younger generation of workers coming in that want to know more and feel like they're a bigger part of the organization and have a better understanding of the big picture challenges and solutions potentially that are out there. Cybersecurity is one of those, and it is something that at almost every level of a production process, a human being can have a huge impact, positively or negatively, but hopefully positively in terms of making the organization more secure.
The biggest challenge here, I think, that's with OT, what I've experienced over the years, is that sometimes some of these fabrics and networks of OT have been there for so long. And if you do even the smallest tweak just to put some protection in place, you're going to ruin latency, that there's so much dependencies. So it's such an incumbent network that it's very, very difficult to do changes.
Yeah.
So that's a bigger challenge. It's a lot more of a challenge than you see in the IT world. And that's something that we also need to understand. How can you manage within this environment, which is very, very difficult to do some changes, but still do the relevant protections and put in the relevant guardrails so that nothing happens to your production line, which will request a recall and so on and so on.
Absolutely. Speaking about the production environment, another thing I'd like to get your thoughts on are patches. We've been doing a lot of coverage recent on new vulnerabilities that are coming out, and we're getting better at seeing these things before they become day zeros or day ones and getting ahead of it. The companies are doing a great job, especially the larger automation suppliers, in terms of really getting these patches out there. But when it comes to the plant level, it's hard to shut stuff down and implement these patches in an efficient manner where we can still keep product going out the door, because at the end of the day, that's what we're all about, right? What advice or what have you seen in terms of best practices for implementing these patches to make sure we're secure without hindering overall production?
Yeah. So again, it's not so much my domain, but there are all kinds of technologies for virtual patching, like intrusion prevention, intrusion detection tools that are there to actually help with these 0 days before you actually go and deploy a patch world, across the entire production line, but it helps in many cases. Yeah. So the different technologies in place that are there both to detect and prevent from intrusions that are there against or to help with this virtual patching sort of everything. That's some of the technologies that I know that are in place. And as you said, it's not an easy task to do patching across the entire production line. Sometimes it's very, very painful. And I know of organizations that they would time a maintenance window once a quarter or once a year, which means that they're exposed all this time if they're not doing some virtual patching.
Makes sense. It's just that constant evolution, again, that we've been talking about here. Another one of those factors. So, Gabi, as we kind of wrap things up, the question I always like to end with is, what are some of the bigger trends that you might see really impacting industrial cybersecurity over maybe the next 12 to 18 months?
I believe that, again, I think that what we'll see more and more, I think that ransomware and different types of attacks will happen in the world of industrial, because it happens. And I think that what we see is sometimes some of the cyber attack technologies, they lag. They start with IT and then they start finding themselves in the OT. Okay, and this is something that we've seen in multiple, like Stuxnet as an example, and other places that's well back, but we see this happening. So I think that we need to look and understand and be very, very open to seeing, understanding what's happening in the IT world. I also think that a very, very important thing that I mentioned before is better understanding your supply chain and your third-party risk, because it's not only about how good and well protected I am, but it's about your suppliers. And it's not only about the digital connectivity of your suppliers, but it's also about your physical connectivity. If you have a partner that has some of your data or whatever, and then they're vulnerable, it could impact you. And we've seen so many of these supply chain attacks or third-party attacks last year and the past couple of years. This is something that we need to look at. And third-party software, third-party suppliers, or the suppliers we all work with suppliers, and it's something that we need to take into consideration when we're looking at the entire your cybersecurity posture.
Yeah, just ask Clorox or Dole about those supply chain attacks, and they can offer some perspective without a doubt. You've brought up ransomware a couple times, Gabi, so I have to ask, and I know this is kind of a tough question, but when it comes to those situations, we know the standard is we don't want to pay. We never want to fund terrorists and what they're doing, but then there's the realities of getting your business up and running. Where do you stand, or what kind of advice would you offer in terms of when you're hit with the ransom, how do you handle the payment element of it?
So I'm going to give you, a very political or whatever. So I haven't got a good answer, and I could also say it really depends. I think that it's a balance. I personally don't think that you should, because then you'll get yourself to extortion and so on. That's what usually happens. But it really depends. It depends on how critical your systems are and so on and so on. I think that what we've seen is the healthcare industry has been significantly impacted by ransomware. Why? Because they're so vulnerable because of the life critical systems that they have there. So the question is, should they pay or not? It's not for me to say. The problem, if you pay, extortion. If you don't pay, it takes a lot of time to mediate and fix things, and it's also very, very costly. So it really depends. And it's not for me to say that. So to give a right answer.
Understood. Last question I got for you, Gabi. A lot of times when we're doing interviews, we talk about what keeps you up at night. We've been talking about all the things that can keep somebody who's involved with threat intelligence up at night. What helps you sleep at night? What do you see as some of the positive movement that's been made in cybersecurity, especially when it comes to threat intelligence, that lets you rest okay at night?
Yeah. So first of all, I once asked, because as part of my job, I talk to a lot of CISOs, and I found myself asking my CISO, what keeps you up at night? And he said, I hate that question. Don't ask me that question ever again. I hate when security vendors ask that question.
Yeah.
What keeps me, I'm in a situation in life where I sleep very well, and all is good, and I do my job, and so I have a balance. I think that technology is in place. There's a lot of technologies. I think there's place for consolidation of these technologies, but there's a great technologies. There's a lot of innovation related to cybersecurity. There's a lot of willingness to actually adopt technology, which is a good thing. I think that we're really using the cutting edge and understanding what can be done. And I think that we're always pushing the envelope on what can be done. I think it's very, very encouraging. And what I'm seeing is a lot of young, innovative ideas from, that are coming into providing good solutions, understanding friction, understanding user experience, understanding what is needed. And I think all of these are very, very good in our ability to challenge ourselves with what's happening in the world of cyber security.
Thanks, Gabi. And for more information on the work he and his colleagues are up to, you can check him out at cybersixgill.com. Thanks for joining us today. And to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore in Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@ien.com. For Gabi Reish, I'm Jeff Reinke, and this is Security Breach.